Welcome back. You're watching FinWeek Money Matters. Now, the South African government is under fire. Voters and the business fraternity alike are concerned about issues ranging from power supply to what is happening in Parliament. In studio to debate whether South Africa is heading for a disaster is Peter van Reyneveld, founder of the new South Africa Party, a new political party that launched this Monday, and Makashule Gana. He's the Deputy Federal Chairperson of the Democratic Alliance. Gentlemen, thank you for making the time to join us. I might be forward and assume that you both probably concur that the country is headed for disaster/crisis. And so let me move from that premise, and let me start with you, Peter, first, and ask you, in your analysis, what do you believe is at the core and is the source of the crisis that the country finds itself in?
Nozi, thank you. I think before we do that, one must ask the question, what do you mean by a crisis? And in my opinion, it's all relative, actually. You know, do you define a crisis by, let's say, a country like Syria or Somalia? Are we in a crisis like India may be in? Because, for example, there could be between 250 million or 500 million people living in the streets in abject poverty. I think in relation to those countries, we're no ways in a crisis. And the question is your glass half full or half empty? And in my opinion, or my glass personally, is half full. I really am very optimistic about this country, despite the fact that we've got problems like power and education and things like that. But you can probably think of the economy of South Africa as a motor car. You buy a car, and if you don't quite maintain it all that well, it gets a bit weaker and doesn't go as fast, and maybe you have a dent or two, and eventually you may have to do some replacement, like a tire or a gasket blows.
But it's moving forward.
It's moving forward. It's moving forward. And some people like to replace their cars every 50,000 Ks. But I know that there's some farm buckies out there that have been going for about 1 million Ks. And I think that this economy is going to be around in 1 million Ks time. And the reason why I feel like that very strongly is there's one major factor that differentiates us from Zimbabwe and Egypt and many places like that. And that is our transition in 1994 was a peaceful one. And it wasn't at the barrel of a gun.
So I'll come back to that, and I'll come back to your analysis, but let's get your sense of whether this country is in a crisis or headed for disaster. And if you believe that that is the state that this country is in, what is at the source of it?
No, thanks, Nazib. I wouldn't say that we are in a crisis or we are reaching the disaster point. Obviously, if we do not take care of this country, we can head there. What's crucial is that when you look at South Africa, you do have institutions that work. The good thing is that the judiciary, the courts still work. You still have the Auditor General's office that still gives the right picture, in terms of what's happening. Because one of the things that will make us to reach the crisis or disaster stage is that when you start having institutions not giving the exact picture of what's happening in the country, and having also opposition parties in parliament, making sure that in a small possible way, the executive accounts and they come to...
I want to come back to the role of the opposition in Parliament, and in particular I want to tap into the recent plagues that we've seen in Parliament and whether the opposition is actually engaging constructively to take the country forward. But before I do that, Peter, let me come back to you. You say the glass is half full. You say that there is hope. You've launched a new party, the new South Africa Party. What exactly are you putting on the table to move the country forward?
Nozi, I believe completely in the change that has taken place since 1994. I embrace all of the transition to the new South Africa, and that's why I've called it the new South Africa Party. The only thing that I feel very strongly about is that we need to improve the level of corporate governance, and particularly in the public sector. Governance principles need to be applied much, much more strongly than they are. Salim Ahmed Salim, the ex-Secretary General of the OAU, gave a talk in May this year at UNISA. And his point was that good governance is the key thing that needs to be applied in economies throughout Africa for us to achieve the change that we need.
So good governance is the value proposition we're getting from the new South Africa Party. Makashule, let's come back. Let's go back to Parliament and how opposition parties have been engaging in Parliament. Has it been constructive?
In a way, maybe it has been constructive. Others might view it as not being constructive, but you get to that stage when you have an executive that doesn't want to account. You know, the executive that feels they're above the law. You know, for example, you have a president in this country that actually says to hell with the rules of Parliament and the Constitution. In that, when we say please come and answer the questions, because you have to account, you are elected by Parliament, so you must come to Parliament to come and answer the questions that we as representatives of South Africans have to pose towards you and your executive. But then you have this thing that the governing party at the moment just refuses to come to Parliament and account, and they're doing everything in their power to try to shield the executive.
But the criticism has been that what we're seeing in Parliament, there's two views. The one is that it's reflective of the country sliding into a banana republic, and another view that welcomes this and saying, actually, there's now robust debate, people are being held to account, and I would assume that you go with the latter view, although you have to take cognizance of what others are saying.
Obviously, we have to take cognizance of what others are saying in terms of maybe the way we have been, as members of Parliament, been conducting ourselves there, that they are not used to that kind of robustness. But obviously, one of the positive things that have happened in the last 6 months is that now ordinary South Africans are following what's happening in Parliament. And now when people start following what's happening in Parliament, now they can start influencing what happens in the... Because if you had to ask someone what happened in the fourth Parliament, they can't even quote one instance of what happened. But in the last 6 months, people are tuning into the parliamentary channel to see how our opposition parties holding the government accountable.
I've got less than a minute. I want you both to answer this one simple question. If there was one significant change, and in your particular instance, the new South Africa party could make to move the country forward, what would it be? And of course, the same question to you, Makashule. What is the one thing that the DA thinks is critical for turning the direction of the country? Let's start off with you, Peter.
I'd say, if I can say two things. Firstly, a massive poverty alleviation program. Secondly, a new social contract for the teaching profession, so that they become recognized as some of the most important people in the country, but they must also know that they have to deliver the goods to produce the leaders of our future.
And the teaching profession. Makashule?
Most importantly, it's skilling our people to get to access the job opportunities that are out there, because you can't alleviate poverty unless people can get into jobs. So creating the right environment for people to get jobs, and making sure that all the other things like corruption that actually makes people not to come and invest in this country are eliminated, so that people can come invest and others can get jobs.
We're reducing the barriers to the labour market, and we're eliminating corruption. A very, very insightful debate.